Did you know it's cheaper to build a HELLCAT, TRX, or even a Scat Pack 392 than it is to buy any of them? Well, we're going to talk about it on this episode of ModStars. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of ModStars. I am your host Z, and today we're going to talk about the Dodge, Chrysler, and Jeep Pentastar V6 and the 5.7 liter Hemi, and how you can mod both on budget to compete with the 392, HELLCAT, and the TRX. I kid you not. So, let's get started. I really want to give a quick shout out to Brian and his friend. I'm sorry I did not catch your name when I met you guys at work. You're the guys are the reason why I made this video. I told you when I met you it'd be done by week's end. This is Sunday as of this recording. I'll finish the video tonight and upload it tonight. So come Monday morning, it'll be out. You guys can listen to it. And this is for not just for you guys, but for anybody who's listening to this and you kind of got crap for owning a V6 or having the 5.7 Hemi, which, I mean, before the Scat Pack or the 392s even came out in HELLCATs, before any of that existed, people would get on, the 5.7s if they had the 392. So it's just kind of a ladder of put downs. And as of today, you won't have to deal with that anymore. So, and I'm going to tell you why. But I'm actually going to do something a little bit different this time around. I'm going to list off all the modifications and the importance of them first, and then I'll get into my reasoning to why I explain it this way and other thoughts on the topic. So I'm going to give you the important stuff first, and then I'll get into everything else after that. Let's get started. Let's go. So as always, if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and share the knowledge that I share with you and it helped you, that's great. However, I am not responsible for what you do or don't do. Your successes or your failures, that is solely upon you and the decisions you make, whether you work on the car yourself or you send it to somebody to get work done on your behalf, to do the work for you. So, now that's out the way, we're going to start with the foundation. Wheel hop is an issue on these cars when you accelerate, whether it's stock or not. So, to eliminate wheel hop, white line cradle bushings are something that you should get. The bushings go for $266. BMR also has trail arms. The upper trail arms go for $220. The lower trail arms go for $110. The prices for the mods that I list in this video, like every video, could change throughout the time you listen to the video and look these up. But that's what they're going for right now. As far as wheel hop goes, if you don't know what it is, a simple way to visualize this is like when you skip a rock over the surface of a body of water. Versus sometimes when you throw a rock in, it'll slide across the surface of the water. So when you accelerate in your car, the rear wheels bounce off the ground and in between the chassis. So not only are you skipping the rock, there is this weird force field or barrier above where the rock is traveling in air that it bounces off of too, creating like this pinball effect. So not only are you fighting for traction, the force is so misdirected, it bounces throughout the car. So you have two different problems of why you can't get the power to the ground. And that's just in a stock car. Imagine having a more powerful car, whether you mod it or buy like a 392 or a HELLCAT. That's power you can't use even with a stickier tire. Not efficiently anyway. But we're going to leave those opinions for later on at the end of the video. So those are three things that you can get to eliminate wheel hop. And the next thing we're going to talk about is power, and not specifically from the engine. We're talking about the differential first. So between the V6 and the 5.7 Hemi, the final drive is actually the same. It's a 2.62 to 1 ratio. Now you can find 309 diffs even on eBay for as low as $405. This will improve the acceleration of the car mechanically. And in addition to that, you could also add a higher stall torque converter that will improve this as well. It will allow the car to accelerate, well, at a higher stall, at higher RPMs, hence the name. I know I'm doing oversimplifications. Talk about that for another video, but Pro Torque, for example, is a company that makes torque converters for Hemis and, well, Dodge period and other platforms. They have a torque converter, I believe it's 2800 stall for about $690, and it's rated up to between 500 and 600 horsepower. if you're planning to go that route, I would recommend that torque converter. Now, if you're making less than that, does that mean it would harm the car? No, not necessarily. It's just really the limit of power it can handle before it may or may not have problems. And, some people say that torque converters, higher stalls build up heat. That may or may not be the case, and this as well. It just depends. But if it is, get a transmission cooler. That might help out as well. And those are universal. You can find them anywhere. So already we've eliminated wheel hop and improved the acceleration of the car without even touching the motor yet. Not even talking about the motor. So that 300, let's just say 340 horsepower, for example, assuming that's what, stock Hemis make to the wheels, or perhaps the 250 that the V6s may or may not make to the wheels. That's going to pull a lot harder now, even in stock form. It may not be noticeable right away, but comparing, before and after times, or even running a buddy who has a stock V6 or a stock RT, you're going to notice the differences. Whether it's from a dig or from a roll, you'll notice. So now we'll talk about engine mods. Now you guys already know I like to keep things simple, affordable, sleeper status. So of course, drop-in filters, K&N, find them anywhere from $50 to $80. Probably cheaper, depending on where you find it at. Now, moving on to the intake manifold, starting with the V6. Modern Muscle Extreme is a website that you can either send in your intake manifold to get ported, or you can pretty much, from my understanding, buy one, if I understand that correctly, or you can do it yourself. But if you don't have the tools or time, you can send it out to get ported. They charge, you can get this for $660. I'm sure if you took it to a machinist locally, they'd probably do it for $300, maybe less. It just depends. And for the 5.7 Hemi, you can do it for the stock manifold for about $400. Now, going on to the Hemi, there is a well-known tuner for, Mopar community by the name of Jay Green. And then there's also YouTube channel RT Life, who mentioned this as well, that the 392 intake manifold is the one to swap onto the 5.7 Hemi. You could also do a 6.1 liter SRT8 intake manifold, but a lot of people recommend a 392 intake manifold as one to do. Now, there's going to be additional components to go along with that. So if you want to save the money and time and make it a little bit more convenient, you can just keep the 5.7 manifold, port it out, and do the mods we're going to mention in a minute. Or be like, why not? Let's just give it a shot. So I'm not saying that it'll make the same amount of power as with the 392 manifold, but we also discussed that power is meaningless if you can't put it down and use it anyway, or if it's not applied to its greatest potential. So I'll leave that up to you guys, but I'll go ahead and throw on the parts and the cost roughly. So you could find the 392 intake manifold. I found one on OfferUp, honestly, for $350. And that was crazy. Other than that, ported from a shop, we're looking at $754 or brand new. You'd also need an MSD RPM switch. It goes for about $229. The crooked fuse block is about $84. Additional wiring. The Mopar intake seal for the manifold is $17. A map sensor is $28. PCV hose is $8. And the intake short running valve is $109. Now, ballparking this, we're looking at around $1,100 in parts alone based on this intake manifold swap. However, doing research on videos and forums, there's a little bit of inconsistency with what parts you need exactly. Some argue you need all the parts I listed. Others argue you need like only 3, which is the RPM switch, the fuse block, and the intake short running valve. So anybody who has this vehicle and wants to do this conversion or this swap of the intake manifold, I highly recommend that you take the time to talk to somebody who's done it or has had it done and confirm with them what you would need. I watch YouTube videos, but just because it worked for that individual doesn't mean there's not another way to do it without less problems. and less money and less time with the car being down. So just reach out to somebody, ask, and confirm. So, but anyways, that's the way to do it. And what's interesting about that is, in addition to, if I'm not mistaken, the 392 cam, that is another thing that you can do for the Hemi that also has some inconsistency with results. And that could be based on the individual's expectations versus reality, or lack of mods or a process that they've done to the car, or all the above. I don't know what it is with certain individuals. Some people have had success with it, others have not. Some say it makes the car lose power, but it all depends because, well, tune, amongst other things. And there's a YouTube video that shows a dyno graph between a 270 comp cam, the 392 cam, and the factory 5.7 cam. And with the bolt-ons and tune and everything, the 392 cam setup made the most power. I believe it was 388 and about 395 pound-feet of torque. I could be wrong on the torque numbers. But that was impressive within itself. And it's a factory cam, so you'll hear it, and it's going to sound like a very aggressive exhaust with the valves open. It won't have that chomp like we're used to hearing in more aggressive cams. So two other things to consider are exhaust mods. Catbacks or mufflers, or really just muffler deletes, even for a noise type of thing. If you wanted more noise, that's very simple. Or just simply do an X pipe. It's the best bang for buck. Of course, Corsas are there. Corsa exhaust for the V6 costs about $600. I just don't think it is that necessary. And as far as headers go, the JBA shorties for the 5.7 liter Hemi are the only ones that I could find at the time for, again, the 5.7, but it's 50 state legal. I couldn't find any headers for the V6. I tried looking, maybe I didn't look hard enough, but if you wanted to improve the flow through the headers, especially if you have a supercharger, you can just have those ported. And tuning outside of a supercharger kit, Livernois Motorsports has a PCM unlock and tuner for the V6 and the 5.7 V8 that is 50 state legal. So those are really cool things to consider. All right, now we're going to move on to the forced induction or forced air applications. We already talked about the all-motor setups at a very, very basic level. Now we're going to talk about superchargers. Starting with the V6, RIP Supercharger is a company that has been making, well, it's made, honestly, the V6 Dodge Jeep Chrysler platforms very popular because they have a supercharger kit that will increase the power roughly up to 430 horsepower on the V6. And cruising, believe it or not, a few people have claimed that on long trips they've gotten up to 30 miles per gallon cruising at like roughly 75 miles an hour. So I was like, that's really cool. You get a huge increase in power, almost double your power, and you improve your fuel economy as well. They use, if I'm not mistaken, it is a Pro Charger for the RIP Supercharger kits, if not a Vortex. Either way, it's a centrifugal supercharger, which looks like a turbo, has some characteristics of a turbo and some characteristics of a supercharger because it's still belt and pulley driven, right? Now, I believe RIP also does superchargers for the 5.7 as well, but we'll talk about that maybe later on in another video, part 2 or something, I don't know. But by the time I make this video, RIP Superchargers has a sale, and it's going for about $6,000 for the supercharger kit for like a 2016 or 2015, 2017 Charger and Challenger. And yes, the kit is 50 state legal. Now, for the 5.7, I want to talk about Pro Charger and the P1 SC kit, and that goes for about $8,200, also 50 state legal. And what's cool about Pro Charger is on their website, depending on where you live in the country, they'll show you shops in your area that are authorized in installing the kit for you. if you're going to run roughly around 500 horsepower or more and do some good old fashioned, drag racing, from a stop, from a dig, and launch the car, I highly recommend getting a differential brace. Performance is one of the companies that makes them, and it goes for about $200. Now, there's so many videos out there of HELLCATs, for example, especially when they first came out and they had the drag packs on them. As soon as people would take off at the tree, there's a slow-mo of the rear end just shaking and the car stops, and you see little pieces of metal and metal rings from the gears falling out from the back of the car because they blow up the differential. This is a brace that will pretty much absorb a lot of that force to prevent that from happening, or at least reduces the chances of that from happening. So it's kind of like if you have stability in your legs, you don't have to worry about hurting your knee. But if that stability is off, you might blow out your knee, and then you need a brace to help do what it was supposed to do to begin with. But you get my point. So highly recommend that. It doesn't cost that much, and it would save you a lot of money and time. Just because the differential breaks doesn't mean that's the only thing that broke. Oh, and quick bonus. As far as the manifolds go, the 392 manifold, you can run that on stock injectors. Now, I'm curious what would happen power-wise if you ran the 392 injectors on the 5.7, at that point of which you would have to have it tuned, but would there be a change in power? And if you have the supercharger, for example, whether it's the V6 or the V8, and you upgraded the injectors on that as well, would there be a change in power or not? Because, from my understanding, the boost on superchargers are limited based on the size of the pulley. Doesn't mean that power couldn't be made elsewhere, somehow else, but I'm, again, just curious. If it could work on, stock injectors, cool. But I just haven't seen that, so I don't know. If you want to get the 392 injectors, you can find them used for about $350 and new for about $300 more. So we're talking $650 more or less. Now, to help keep all this power on the ground, I'm going to share my tire of choice, and that is the Lionheart LH5 all-season performance tire. On Modern Muscle's website, this is a tire that is really, it's their top-rated tire for this car. Why I recommend it? It's in the name, all season. When's the last time you've seen somebody on, radials or slicks and they drive the car every day, rain or shine, winter or summer, dirt or snow? Never. You never will. The tread's different as well versus a summer or a sport tire. And as far as traction goes, like any tire, especially at a drag strip, you play with the tire pressure, and that will affect the traction that your vehicle gets too, other than weather conditions and things of that nature. That and just the life of the tire just lasts longer, probably because, again, it's a daily use thing. If you don't have a heavy foot and you don't drive like a madman, the life of the tire will, of course, any tire, be extended, and it's really even wear around all four corners of the vehicle. Now, as far as brakes go, because you can't really improve the power and keep the stock brakes as much as people do it, it's dangerous, it's silly, but no worries, no more. Power Stop Z26 Street Warrior brake kit. It is, I believe it's cross-drilled and slotted rotors and upgraded brake pads. For the V6, it goes for about $465. For the RT, it's $560. And that is not just for the front or the rear, it's for all four wheels, the front and the back. Now, if you want to improve your handling a little bit more, something that hangs in a little bit better in the turns, Eibach has a handling kit for $875. It includes lowering springs and sway bars. The lowering springs, I believe, will drop the vehicle by like an inch or so. So if you have bigger wheels, you shouldn't have to worry about rubbing unless they're just stupid tall wheels that you put on the car, and especially whether you roll the fenders or not, and that's kind of like on you. But no, it'll look good. Real quick, now that I've discussed everything to give a basic foundation of modding, not just this car, but any car, but specifically these cars, I want to talk about some things that you all may have heard or have been told about the V6 and the RT, such as why get one or why mod one? Because the amount of money you spend on mods and the car, you could just get a 392. And yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. But you already have the car. It's running. You like it. You want to keep it. Why not? Now, I'm going to tell you a little story right now. Story time. Here we go. So, the last two younger guys I met that have Chargers, one had a V6, one had an RT. They didn't know each other. But the guy with the RT heard the other guy had a V6. And he said, why did you get a V6? His response was, because that's what it had when I bought it. Brilliant answer. Kind of hard to argue that one, dispute that one. And the kid with the RT came off like he was the fastest car on the lot. So during that time, without missing a beat, I told the V6 guy, I was like, hey, you heard of Rip Superchargers? He's like, no. So I told him, about the company. And as I talked to the RT guy separately, I asked him, hey, do you have anything done to your car? And he said, no. But I do have a HELLCAT block sitting in my home. I was like, oh, that's cool. He's like, yeah, it's a bare block. I was like, what do you mean bare block? Like, you have cylinders and pistons and all that? He's like, no, it's just a bare block. Like a shell? He's like, yeah. How much you buy it for? About 10 grand. Oh, all right. I'm surprised you didn't just mod the Hemi you have now, the 5.7. And his response was, why would he do that when he can get a 6.2 instead? I was like, well, because you already have the car and it's running, the engine's already there, and 10 grand is pretty much a built motor. Honestly, 5 grand, depending on how creative you are, is a built motor. And 5.7 is not that far from 6.2. You can bore that out to be 6.2 liters if you had to, and you don't have to, based on what I mentioned in the video earlier. But meanwhile, he could have had, potentially a 500 horsepower car. Supercharged anyway. All motor, probably about 400, 420. Either way, though, it's a pretty good amount of power there. And instead, he bought a shell of a motor for what he could have bought another car for. I don't share the story to put anybody down either. It's just a difference in mentality, simply put. One guy bought the car because he liked the other one, wanted to be and believed he was like the fastest guy in the parking lot. And when I talked to both of them separately, who do you think, and it's kind of obvious here, considered what I had to say more, the one with the V6 or the guy with the RT with the shell of a HELLCAT motor? 10 grand. He could have had practically a built car at that point, or on the way. All motor or supercharged, you can push a decent amount of power reliably if he spent his money differently, if he did his research a little bit better as well. That's an expensive lesson to learn, assuming, he learns from it, and he might not, and that's okay. But, 10 grand, you could buy a Chrysler 300 for less than that, actually, and for about 20 grand, more or less, have a 500, 600 horsepower car. What other car in the used market today can compete with that? I'll wait. It could also be, again, going back to budget, I was like, oh, they like the car and the insurance is cheaper than an RT or vice versa or whatever. So there's so many variables and things that go into it, and things ultimately that may or may not matter to an individual, and that's okay too. Everybody's got a preference, right? I just like to share the preference of, hey, this goal is a little bit more attainable than you realize, and here's how and why. Before HELLCATs existed, the 392 SRT and the SRT8 as well were the cars that weren't common and the cars to get, and they would also put down the V6 and the 5.7 Hemi as well. And it just seems like the ladder's grown over the years. You could get, I know I said it a minute ago, like with the whole Chrysler deal, right? The 300 deal. I've seen, Dodge Magnums, for example, or Chrysler 300s, pretty much built motors, high stall torque converter, drag pack, as in suspension and tires, supercharged, running like 10.9, 10.8 in a quarter mile, pushing 600 horsepower. And of course, those are probably their best runs, but consistency is another thing too. Like that's basically HELLCAT times for a fraction of the cost, less than half the cost of a HELLCAT. Probably talking like 20 grand. And I don't even know if C6 Corvettes go for 20 grand right now. They did before COVID hit, but even those, they're not running 11s, not without help. They're definitely not running 10s, not stock. And they push like 420, 430 to the wheels, and they're light for what they are, ideally. So yeah, that's fine. But we're talking like full-size sedans here, things that weigh well over 4,000 pounds on average, that are pushing those times. That within itself is impressive. And you still have the luxury, for example, of a Chrysler, the comfort even. So that's what I think is really cool. You can improve these vehicles and do it within a certain budget, depending on your goals and your skills and your comfort to do so. Hope you guys enjoyed part 1. There will be a part 2 that will go into a bit more specific details of how to get if you want the power number, that is, of like HELLCATs, Trackhawks, or beyond that, assuming you want it or need it. You may not want or need that much power because you can achieve such a goal with less money and less power. But I digress. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching and listening. Have a great day. See you soon.